Welcome to the Daily Dawg Podcast. Today is Tuesday, September 23rd. This is the fifth week of the 2025 season, and this is the Bama week, or Alabama week. We are building up to the big Alabama game on Saturday in Sanford Stadium. It is going to be a 7:30 night game. When we looked at the schedule before the season started, one might have thought this would be a marquee matchup that would have ESPN Game Day coming to campus and, being the night game and ESPN Game Day and a top 10 matchup. Honestly, the reason it's not that is really Alabama. Alabama lost their first game of the season, as I'm sure you all know, against Florida State. They looked pretty bad doing it. They were kind of beat physically on both lines of scrimmage and didn't look competitive. Since then, they've won two games against what I'm tempted to call Patsy or cupcake games. It's always a little hard to think of Wisconsin as a cupcake game, although humorous story. Hopefully you're fans of SEC shorts. If you haven't seen SEC shorts, and I'm sure you have, but if you haven't, I highly recommend you get on YouTube and enjoy each week's episode of SEC shorts. This week's SEC shorts has a hilarious bit about a farmer who takes in rejected pieces of college football past, and including they had depictions. They have, guys wearing T-shirts, and if you've seen them before, and so they had a depiction of the Alabama dynasty as a thing of the past, Clemson's playoff hopes. They had lots of old bowl games whose names and bowl games are gone. They had the BCS computer from the bygone era there, Larry the Dr. Pepper guy, and it was a hilarious depiction too. They had Wisconsin being competitive in football. Was one of the guys wearing a shirt, and he said the farmer guy who's taken in all these. It's like a second chance farm, like one of those farms where they take in animals that they have nowhere else to live, and they get to live out their life on this farm. So the Wisconsin, the farmer talks about how sometimes the entities living on the farm will go out to the road and wait for somebody to come by and pick them up, and nobody ever does. And at that moment, they show a clip of Wisconsin guy standing there, Wisconsin being competitive in football on his T-shirt. He's holding a football, and he's looking forlorn, waiting for somebody by the road to come get him. And of course, nobody does. And Wisconsin is not looking competitive in football. I mean, Bama beat them solidly week before last. They had, of course, Alabama had the off week like we did this week. And so Bama took them to the woodshed pretty much, and they were playing with a backup quarterback. Their quarterback was hurt, and I think Wisconsin is not going to be competitive in the Big Ten, and we're going to look at that game. I mean, obviously it's a Big Ten school. Obviously it's a Power 5 school. So generally speaking, we might think we see more from there than we do like when they played Northeast Louisiana or us playing Austin Peay or Marshall. But in the end, maybe not. Maybe Wisconsin doesn't prove to be much more than that. So what has happened is since the Florida State game, Alabama's definitely played with more energy. They've looked more motivated. They don't look like they're giving up on their coach just yet. Which may be the case in Clemson. I don't know, but Clemson didn't look that energetic getting beat by Syracuse last week. That's a different topic, but so we don't really know what to expect from Florida State. I keep thinking about how Florida State beat Alabama. I'm sorry. We don't know what to expect from Alabama. We see that one Florida State result, and we don't know how good Florida State is. The temptation would be to say, well, when they played one good team, especially and on the road, they didn't respond well, but then they played a couple lesser teams at home, and we're counting Wisconsin now as the lesser team. I guess that's the explanation there. And they played well. They've looked good doing it, but what does that mean? We don't really know. So we're not really sure what it means that our defense was so leaky against Tennessee, and yet we won the game, and we played with a lot of heart. We played with fire, passion, and energy. That's become the motto of the team against Tennessee. The offense kept finding ways to respond. We talked about all those things that came from the Tennessee game. So we think that Georgia has proved themselves in a way that Alabama hasn't. Alabama's gotten beat. And so the answer is maybe Florida State is back. I don't know how back we want to say they are, but They look like they're certainly better, and they've already won more games than they did last year when they went 2-10. So crazy up and down for Florida State to be in playoff contention and crowing about being left out of the playoffs, to go to a 2-10 season, and then now maybe they're back and maybe they're a contender. And with Clemson falling off in the ACC, and a lot of people coming in thinking Clemson was the team to beat, Miami has now gotten a lot of love. They've jumped up in the top 25 to number 2. They're getting more first place votes. So now Miami's got a lot of love. And then you got Georgia Tech is undefeated, beat Clemson, isn't playing the heavyweights in the conference. So maybe Georgia Tech is a team that's going to emerge into the ACC championship game and have something to say about that. So anyway, key point here is that Alabama hasn't held up their end of the bargain. When I looked at the schedule coming into the season and thought about, which games I might go to, what's going to be exciting, what are going to be the environments, what things are going to happen, this is a game where I'm looking at this game and I'm looking at the Texas game and I'm thinking, wow, both of these could draw game day. Would game day come twice? Obviously, part of that depends on us, right? Like, we have to be also a still elite team, still in the top echelon of college football as the season goes on down into November. If we're going to draw the interest of game day, Texas would as well, and Texas has already taken a loss, and there's a lot of controversy swirling around. Controversy is maybe too strong a word, but there's some uneasiness, some grumbling going on around Texas, especially given the way Arch Manning has played. And so these were two games coming into the season that everybody, including me, looked at and thought these are going to be marquee matchups. And obviously Georgia fans and Texas and Alabama fans have thought so too. The ticket prices in advance on resellers for these games have been through the roof. And but now that we're at Alabama week, I'm not sure what it is, right? It's an odd game. Alabama actually fell in the rankings this week. They were 14th last week after beating up on Wisconsin and looking good for 2 weeks in a row against lesser competition. And now this week in the rankings come out. They didn't play. They didn't do anything wrong necessarily, but they fell 3 spots. We'll talk about that a little bit later as we go through a couple segments and get to that. But what does that mean just to set up where we are right now? What are we talking about now? Well, this isn't the marquee matchup we thought it might be. This is number 5, Georgia. We've held up our end of the bargain. But Alabama started the season 8th. Had they won their games, they would at least probably still be 8th, maybe higher. So this could have been a top 5 matchup and certainly a top 10 matchup. But instead, now it's a number 5 versus number 17. It's probably not even the best overall matchup in the SEC this week, because you have Ole Miss and LSU. LSU is number 3 and Ole Miss is number 13. So they average out as a more exciting or dramatic game by rankings for that game. And I'm not sure that you would have thought that before the season started. Ultimately, game day, and of course the most important thing here is not where game day went, but just saying, when I looked at games and started planning out my thinking and where I might be, what games I might go to, what things I might want to see, I enjoy the atmosphere when game day comes to town. Even if I don't go to the game, I think it's fun to go up there, and it's kind of a perfect setup when you have a 7:30 p.m. game and game day comes. You can go to campus, you can be a part of the tailgate scene, you can go to game day and kind of enjoy all the festivities. You can even come all the way back home if you live in Metro Atlanta like I do, and get back home and watch the game at home if you don't have tickets and you're not going to spring for $350 to $500 for a ticket, or you're not a season ticket holder already. So that's one of the things I was thinking about, but that's not where we are. This is a game that definitely has everybody's attention. It's going to be one that people are looking at. It is a marquee game. It is the 7:30 game, ESPN, ABC, but it's not even close to the marquee matchup of the weekend. Again, game day is off to Oregon, is going to Happy Valley to see the Oregon Penn State game, and that game is now a matchup between number 3 and number 6. So obviously that game will be broadcast with Fox and the Big Ten broadcast partners, and so I'm sure, I haven't checked the schedule to see, but I'm sure Fox Big Noon Saturday crew, they're going to be there. So you're going to have dueling pregame shows with Fox Big Noon Saturday and ESPN Game Day there. It'll be interesting to see. All of that is just to put the contrast to say that this is still a big matchup. This is still one everybody in the country is going to want to see. but it's not the marquee matchup that we once thought it was. Line continues to bounce around between 3.5, and 2.5, still sitting, I think, at about 2.5, and the over-under at about 54.5. So again, Vegas still thinking of this as something like a 29-26 game with Georgia coming out narrowly on top. Another thing, just I'm sure most of you know this, but when Vegas or the common wisdom in football when you're looking at lines is that the home team is probably worth at least 3.5 or 4 team advantage being at home. So anything less than 4 points, actually, you might say that the line is swinging a little bit towards Bama in that regard. If the line is only 2.5, we maybe should be getting 4 points just by being the home team, the home favorite. So, where does that leave us? So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. Let's break down and preview a little bit what we have in store. Going to go through a little housekeeping and a few corrections first in our first segment, now that we've gotten sort of through the introductions here. Then I want to talk a little bit about the SEC schedule announcement, and I alluded to that coming up several times in recent podcasts, and we have some more information on that, so we want to get back to that and touch base on how that affects, or not how it affects this game, but a little perspective on this game. And then, as I promised, what I want to do is, I think in this segment, the important thing to do here Tuesday is let's take a look at Kalen DeBoer. We've dug in deep into Josh Heupel and how Josh Heupel and Kirby Smart matchups, since we'd already had 4 of those. We dug into those and what do those matchups mean and what do they think? And not everything we talked about in that came to fruition, right? We said we like everybody kind of dug into how her Kirby Smart defense has had the Josh Heupel offense's number, and that didn't prove to be the case. And Vegas was with us. Vegas thought that it was going to be about 50 total points in the game, something like a 27-24 game. We talked about that, maybe 50, 51 points. Didn't work out that way. It was over 80 points in the game. So, but we're going to look at the matchup. We only have one Kirby Smart, Kalen DeBoer matchup. Kalen DeBoer came out on top of that one, winning the game last year at Alabama. And so we'll dig into a little bit more about Kalen DeBoer. Then we're going to take a look at, we can just do a quick preview. We're not quite ready to break down and start going position by position group or line by line through the game and talk about it like we did Tennessee getting ready. We'll do that, I think, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We'll start going through the details, but we'll go ahead and take a little bit of a preview and perspective about what we can see so far from what the teams have done, maybe a little bit of a thought about what UGA might be looking to do as they practice and get ready for the game this week. And, I think that'll cover it for today. So also I'm going to throw in one quick story here, give a little perspective about my position with Alabama, or tell you a few more things about my life relative to Alabama. In yesterday's podcast, I've been a little cryptic, I guess. The goal is to talk about Georgia football and for me to relate to you, the listener, as a fan. And like I've said many a time, I want to kind of have this be like a conversation. It's a very one-sided conversation because I'm the only one talking. But the goal here is to say, let's talk like two knowledgeable, interested Georgia fans who kind of want to break it down and go back and forth and think about, how's this game going to play out? What does it all mean? As fans and longtime fans, what does this mean historically? What does this mean to me? What have been my experiences? That's the kind of relationship I want to build with you as we're talking through this. So I brought up that my wife went to Alabama, and so she's naturally a Bama fan. She has definitely, the whole time we've been married, we've been living here in Metro Atlanta, and obviously I'm a rabid Georgia fan. So she has come to appreciate Georgia, and I came to appreciate Alabama. We go to games and have been to games at both, and we have cheered for both. And so admittedly, I've cheered some for Alabama, never more than Georgia. My love and loyalty is definitely red and black. But as I mentioned yesterday, I certainly didn't mind getting to be in the stands and watching Alabama beat Florida pretty handily in the 90s when that was something that Georgia was unable to do. I've always appreciated that since we're going to watch or go to Bama games and Georgia games in this household. I certainly enjoy that we get 2 chances a year to humiliate Auburn, and we all celebrate the fact that we all hate Auburn. So that's a fun way to look at these things. So I'm going to give you a little bit more perspective on that. So first and foremost, excuse me one sec, a little bit itchy. Sorry. So first and foremost, what we're going to do is I want to go back and correct a couple things. I always hate it when I'm inaccurate, and so it may be silly, even if it's things I said a couple days ago. I still want to go back and say it. One of them is I called Mendoza, the quarterback at Indiana. I called him Francisco Mendoza. His name is Fernando Mendoza. So sorry to him. He certainly deserves that we get his name right. I also alluded to him in the podcast, and I did listen to that part of the podcast again, or I saw some notes from that, and I realized that I brought him up without bringing the context together. And you being smart, knowledgeable fans, I think probably know what I was trying to say. And I had referred to this before in a previous podcast where we were talking about Gunnar Stockton. And I'd brought up how Fernando Mendoza was on the radar, and there was some buzz about Georgia pursuing him in the portal. He played at California last year. He's kind of got an NFL prototypical look in the way his play, his drop back style of play, big arm, pretty accurate, got the overall size and stature that NFL is often looking for in a top quarterback. And so Georgia was looking at, and there does seem to be some truth to the idea that Georgia pursued Mendoza and as an option to bring in. And I made the commentary, and look, I don't know. Kirby Smart has not confided in me, and I doubt he would tell anybody this specifically about what their thinking might have been when they pursued Mendoza. But my sense of it was, it doesn't shock me when there's rumors or an idea that we're pursuing anybody. We have gone multiple times. We've had quarterbacks and what seemed to be the next quarterback, the quarterback of the future, even 5-star guys on our roster, and yet we went out and brought in a veteran quarterback when it was available in the portal. You might remember some guys like I mentioned, Jamie Newman, who never had played at Georgia, but had been a dual threat quarterback at Wake Forest. We still had JT Daniels on the team. Ultimately, Stetson Bennett would emerge as a national championship MVP, and he was on the team. And so there was a lot of options there, but we felt like we needed to have more options, and they brought in Newman. We brought in other guys in the portal, a few guys who have been around and never played in a game. And a lot of that is Kirby likes to promote competition. He likes nobody to think that they're just because they're the only guy there, that they're going to be the guy playing. So he wants to promote that kind of competition. He likes to make sure that you have a backup. I mean, you could easily have, all it takes is 2 bad injuries and you're on your 3rd string quarterback, right? And so if you have a championship team, you have championship aspirations, the quarterback is such a key position. It's hard to keep 3 guys on a roster in today's college football world that would be worthy of taking your team to the playoffs or possibly even winning a national championship. But you would like to have some sort of a backup plan. You don't want to be resting all of your hopes on one guy, even if he's awesome, even if he's almost a surefire national championship quarterback, because if you do that and he gets hurt, that's the motto in football. And it's a little bit of a trite saying, but it's also a very true saying. You're always one play away. The backup is always one play away from being the starter. And once you go to your 2nd string guy, you're still just one play away from being at your 3rd string guy. And we've certainly seen that happen before. It can happen. It does happen. And so the idea of pursuing another quarterback, a really good quarterback, there's nothing wrong with having those options. It didn't necessarily mean, this was the point I brought up in the podcast before, it didn't necessarily mean that the coaches were worried about Gunnar Stockton. They thought, oh gosh, what are we going to do? We can't play with Gunnar Stockton. We're stuck here. Now, we had not been able to bring in the kind of competition and the numbers in the quarterback room we expected. We had pursued Dylan Raiola, and we thought he was going to be the next 5-star recruit that was coming in. He had a change of heart right at the last minute and went to Nebraska, and he's now been, he's in his 2nd year starting at Nebraska. But that was a very late last minute switch, and for all the world, Georgia thought that they had him in. You try to pursue 2 quarterbacks maybe in a recruiting cycle, but it's really hard to get 2 top 10 level quarterbacks to be interested in coming at the same time. No matter what, they might believe and have a lot of confidence in themselves and believe they can compete and win the job, but one of them knows that there's no way they're going to win the job, right? Only one guy is ultimately going to play. That's the nature of the quarterback position. So more often than not, what you'll see is maybe we're successfully recruiting a top 10 level guy and maybe another guy who's in the top 30 of the quarterbacks that are available out there. And interestingly enough, more often than not, it's those top 30 or so guys that sometimes end up being quarterbacks for us compared to that elite 5-star guy, even when we brought those elite 5-star guys in. So anyway, I just think it's key to say, look, going back and refreshing on the Mendoza idea, it didn't ever speak to me that the coaches didn't believe in Gunner or that they thought, oh my gosh, we're in trouble, we need to go get another guy. It's just, look, if you got talent, if you can get talent and there's an opportunity to get talent, then you get talent and then you sort it out. And I think that's really where our coaching staff goes. So if Mendoza is talented and he's a future NFL starting quarterback and he was available for transfer, then I think it made all the sense in the world to pursue him. But he didn't land here. And maybe one of the reasons he didn't land here is maybe we didn't have the kind of money and resources left in our NIL packages to offer him elite starting quarterback money. He ended up in Indiana. I have no idea what kind of resources they have. I'm not even clear. It's not even clear to me why he left California, where he had a lot of praise for what he did last year at California, to go to Indiana. Indiana definitely had a great year last year, but I certainly don't. And Cal, look, they have some history in college football, but they don't have an amazing history, and they don't have an amazing recent history in college football. But their history of college football is definitely more impressive than Indiana, who has no history in college football. I mean, last year's 11-win team was completely, unbelievably out of nowhere. Now, here they are. They're back in the top 25, and then they went out and they just destroyed Illinois this last week, and that's one of the other things that's on my correction list. So we're talking about Mendoza. Wanted to correct that he's not Francisco Mendoza, he's Fernando Mendoza. Wanted to correct why I brought it up to begin with. It's interesting to note that he had a big game and he's tearing it up at Indiana, and Indiana destroyed Illinois, and I erroneously said the score was 66-10. And again, this is really nitpicky. I'm sure you guys don't really care that much, but it was actually 63-10. But still, they dominated the game. And he was nearly perfect. Had I don't remember the numbers, but something in the neighborhood of like 23 of 25 for about 200 and something, 250, 280 yards and a couple touchdowns. But they just surgically destroyed Illinois. They also had over 300 yards rushing in the game. So also in bringing up Illinois, I mentioned when I was talking about the Indiana-Illinois game, because that was one of the games that I talked about is in my grid of the 44 games coming into last week that I was tracking to look at to give us some feedback about where we think teams are going to emerge as playoff teams and what kind of things can we learn from looking at those games and talking about them as we look ahead to think about possible matchups with whoever these teams are if we end up in the playoffs and they end up in the playoffs. So we were looking at Illinois was in that grid. They were one of the 15 teams, and I said I didn't really believe in them, but I went ahead and included them in the 15 teams that were on the watch list for the 12 playoff spots. I think they're coming out of that when I redo the grid this week, and I will redo that, and we'll go over it before the end of the week, but I haven't done that yet. But they were one of those teams, and Indiana was on their schedule as a team that could be trouble and was a top 25 team. Well, guess what? They were more than trouble. They destroyed them. So Indiana, I think, is out. They're not going to be in that grid anymore. Illinois is out. They're not going to be in that grid anymore. Indiana has moved up, probably taken that spot. Probably just swap it out. But Illinois still has games on our grid because they're still playing some of the other Big Ten contenders. And so we're going to want, they may yet be a team. I mean, they're still in the top 25, and they were in the top 25 last year. And, I don't think of them as an elite team. I think that it was silly that they were ranked number 9, and I think we saw that in what happened to them this weekend against Indiana. But, just because they got beat really bad in one game, that doesn't mean that's not definitive proof that they're not number 9. But they haven't shown anything in their schedule in the last 2 years, even winning 10 games last year, that would make you say this is one of the top 10 teams in the country. A top 25 team, yeah, maybe. I mean, they beat a couple decent teams, and like Michigan, who they don't historically have a good track record against, but Michigan was not a good team last year. So So I referenced that they got into a bowl game. They won their 10th game in a bowl game, and I thought they beat an SEC team. So I did go back and look that up. Yes, they did. They beat South Carolina in the bowl games. So, and that's how they got to their 10th win. Again, I don't know that any of us are ready to make South Carolina the standard bearer of SEC greatness, but South Carolina is one of those teams that I've mentioned before, a solid middle of the SEC team. They can be ranked in the top 25. They could maybe be a top 15 team. South Carolina also had ascended to number 11 before they got destroyed at home 31-7 by Vandy. I think that was unrealistic. I don't think South Carolina was the number 11 team. Again, I think they ascended into that placeholder spot by starting off the season ranked and then moving up a little bit. Lenora Sellers, their quarterback, has gotten some Heisman love, but they seemingly lost a lot of pieces from a really good defense last year. So last year's team was basically Lenora Sellers coming up with whatever he can on offense and a really salty defense. And I think they've lost some pieces from that defense, but they're still well coached and they've got players. Maybe not the same guys they had last year, but South Carolina is a player. So, South Carolina is now 2-2, and they're out of the top 25. They may yet play their way back into the top 25. They may finish 8 or 9 wins, and they may be worthy of top 25 consideration. But they were probably never the number 11 team, and they probably never should have been. And I think that got taken care of. But so we've jumped around a little bit, but those are our corrections. So the next segment I wanted to talk about is schedule. So the schedule announcement for the SEC permanent rivals, and I've been calling them permanent rivals, but I listened to Brandon Adams, Dawg Nation daily podcast, and he made a good point that the SEC has been making this point, that the announcement coming is these are the not permanent rivals, but these are, I forgot the way it was phrased, but basically these are the teams that are going to be on the schedule for each of these teams for the next 4 years. So we only know that this is going to be the setup for the next 4 years. They're not putting it permanent. They're not saying, look, for life and eternity, these will be the 4 teams that will be your regular rivals. But they are preserving a lot of the key rivalries. The third Saturday in October game between Alabama and Tennessee has been preserved. And most importantly, from Dawg point of view, Dawg Nation point of view, Dawg fan point of view, like we suggested would happen, it looks like the Alabama and the Auburn games have been preserved. So the question was, what's going to be that third team? And we talked about that a lot relative to Tennessee, because one option would have been Tennessee. We've been playing them every year since the conference went to the divisions in 1992. And even though the divisions are gone, we still were playing them every year through this year. And so, but we now know that 9-game winning streak against Tennessee is probably going to hold for a little while. Now, they could still end up on our rotating schedule. The plan is for everybody to play everybody in the conference, home and away, every 4 years. So I don't know when Tennessee will next appear, but they're not going to be one of the 3. South Carolina, and that's why we were referencing South Carolina. South Carolina is getting the nod as Georgia's third regular opponent or guaranteed opponent on their schedule. So we're going to have Auburn, Florida, and South Carolina on the schedule. And this announcement is coming a little bit early. Apparently this information got leaked. The SEC had announced they would be announcing the schedules today, Tuesday. But this information made it out there, and multiple outlets have confirmed that this is true. So ESPN, On3 Sports, The Athletic, all have been running the story and confirming what the matchups are going to be. So I don't know why it got leaked and why we couldn't just wait until Tuesday. But I just want to go ahead and mention it, because one of the things that was in my notes from yesterday's podcast, and I didn't get to, but I thought was kind of interesting, is the nature of the Bama rivalry. Because I mentioned that, and I brought up, and I came into the story and talked about my wife being a Bama fan and going to Alabama, and then my experience getting to know Alabama football a little bit. And I really didn't know a lot about Alabama football. I mean, I certainly knew of the history and them being a great national championship and SEC championship, and we've already detailed that yesterday, all their numbers, right? But I certainly was aware of that. But I really didn't have a lot of personal connection. I'd been to games at Auburn. I've been to Tennessee. I've been to games at South Carolina. I've been to Clemson games. I've been to Georgia Tech games. So I've been a lot of different places and seen a lot of schools, but Alabama and Georgia just didn't play a lot. And I made mention of this yesterday. We have played, and I say that, but Bama is actually the 70, well, no, wait, I'm going backwards. Bama is actually the 7th most played team Georgia's played in its history, which is, I mean, that sounds, I mean, we played like 100 and something different teams, and that goes down to single digits with some, you know, where we've played some teams only one time. And I mentioned how we've only played Texas 7 times ever so far. We come back to that as we get to Texas. But our most played rivalry games are Auburn. We've played 129 times. Georgia Tech, 118 times. Florida, 103 times. Vandy, 83 times. Kentucky, 78 times. South Carolina, 76 times. And Alabama, 74 times. Then just to round out the top 10, Clemson, 66. Tennessee, now 55 times. And Ole Miss, 47. So it may be a little bit of a surprise. It kind of was for me when I first married into knowing more about Bama or having to know more about Bama. I was really surprised actually to find that we had played them so many times, because when I first got to school and looked at all the difference and saw our rivalries and learned more and more about what it means to be a Bulldog and who the rivals were, one of the things I noticed, we didn't play Alabama a lot. Even though they were part of the SEC, they were a championship team. We were a championship team, one of the great, you know, 2 of the great programs in the country, 2 dominating teams of the SEC, Bama more than Georgia, like we talked about yesterday. But not a lot of games, not a lot of history there. And in fact, I think one of the things that's kind of interesting, I sort of wrote this down. So let me see. We'll go back here. We played Alabama pretty consistently. Like the first game was in like 1895, in the late 1890s. Okay. But then starting in like 1901, we played them kind of most years throughout the early 1900s. And through the 1960s, we played them consistently every decade through the 1960s. And then starting in the 1970s, it started being less consistent. Bama and Georgia only played each other 4 times in the 70s, and we only played twice in the 80s. So I think that's part of why, if you were a Georgia fan around my age, you just didn't really see or experience a lot of Georgia-Alabama football, and you hadn't heard about a lot of those matchups, because in a 20-year span of time through the 70s and the 80s, we only played 6 times total, and only twice in the 80s, which is really when I started becoming more and more aware of the history or recording the history of Georgia football as I was there for it. So we did play them 4 times in the 90s, another 4 times in the early 2000s, the 2001 to 2009 timeframe. From the 2010 teens on, we played another 4 times. And then because of the matchups like we talked about yesterday, because of the forced matchups of SEC championship and national championship matchups that were earned on the field between the 2 teams, we've now played 5 times in the 2020s. So the amount of matchups has really been growing since then. But it's been an interesting ride. So Alabama obviously would never have been our permanent rival. They had to get the Tennessee permanent rival, and they had other things to look at there. I'm not going to go through all the permanent rivals. And again, I got to find that phrase again. I forgot what Brandon Adams said. But basically, the guaranteed teams, the 3 guaranteed teams that are going to be on your schedule for the next 4 years. That's really how the SEC wants you to think of what this announcement is. It's not a guaranteed for life plan, but for the next 4 years, these 3 teams are going to be guaranteed on your schedule. That's what you can know. So for us, Florida, Auburn, South Carolina. And South Carolina makes a lot of sense because, as I pointed out, that's the team we played the 6th most in our history. So Auburn and Florida are number 1 and number 3, so that makes a lot of sense. Georgia Tech's not in our conference, so they're number 2 that we played all time. So obviously, and we're already playing them every year. So then it was really Vandy, Kentucky, South Carolina. Those are the teams that were part of the old East that we used to play every year. And those are teams that we've played, between 76 and 83 times in our history, in the 120 something plus years history of Georgia football. So it would have made a lot of sense. Could have been any of those 3 teams, I think. And So I actually somewhat expected South Carolina. I think my understanding was South Carolina really didn't want this. They would not prefer to have to play Georgia every year, and I don't blame them for that. But it makes a lot of sense historically. And there's been a lot of history and great history between those two teams. I'll maybe talk about that another time, but they're not on our schedule right now this year unless they make it to the SEC championship game. And right now that doesn't seem highly likely. And if we and they both make the SEC championship game, so we're probably not going to play South Carolina this year, but we will be playing them again next year. So it's been a little odd to have them off the schedule. And of course, it's worth noting, as we're highlighting our concern heading into the Bama game, this is maybe our toughest test, or maybe this. Well, you got this, Ole Miss, and Texas all coming to Sanford Stadium this year. Those are going to be 3 tough tests, regardless of what happens to them in their schedules before they get there, whether they are elite top 5 or top 10 teams or just good SEC teams and top 25 teams. Either way, they're all going to present challenges, and they're all going to be a challenge for us to get through this season with our home winning streak intact. And that home winning streak goes all the way back to the 2019 season, and against who? South Carolina. So there's that history. They were the last team to beat Georgia in Sanford Stadium. So that rabbit trails around a little bit, but I thought it was interesting to note that while we have all that history with South Carolina and even Kentucky, the Alabama series has been played 74 times, almost as much as South Carolina or Kentucky at 76 and 78 times. So this game coming up this weekend, since I became the rabid fan, and I keep mentioning, so there's sort of this timeline. I keep saying, look, I've been watching Georgia football close up from the day I stepped foot on campus as a freshman. And I watched Georgia football before that. In fact, I think one funny story, and I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. My parents, desiring highly to, I think, make sure that the chance to have in-state tuition as a key, since I was living here in Georgia, and we didn't have the Hope Scholarship back then, so that wasn't an option. But the in-state tuition is always better than out-of-state tuition or a private school somewhere, right? So my parents did not have any affiliation with Georgia. They had not grown up here. They didn't live here. My mother first went to University of Missouri, in fact, and then got her degree ultimately from Georgia State as an adult here in Atlanta. And my stepfather was a South Carolina alum, so he went to South Carolina, and my father attended Florida and ultimately graduated undergraduate from South Florida. So we had no affiliations really as a family to the University of Georgia. But my parents, wanting to make sure that I was as interested as possible, and knowing that I was a big football fan, a big sports fan, thought that the way to my heart to be excited about going to Georgia would be through football. So each of I don't know if we went my freshman year of high school, but definitely my sophomore and junior year and senior years of high school, my stepfather made sure that he had friends and connections that had good tickets at Georgia, season tickets, and he got a hold of tickets, and we went to games every year so that they could make sure that I was attending Georgia games and getting excited about the prospect of being a Georgia Bulldog. So good move on their part. It wasn't a home run. I looked at a lot of different places and had different ideas. And that's why I sort of delineate this time where I say my rabid fandom started once I got on campus, because honestly, I thought about going a lot of other places. And I'll admit, I even thought about going to Georgia Tech. I mentioned before, I'm kind of a math statistics guy. I also like engineering or considered engineering and considered mechanical engineering. And since Georgia didn't have a mechanical engineering or an engineering program then, we do now at UGA, but we didn't then. The university system of Georgia thought it seemed redundant to have an engineering school in Georgia Tech that's one of the best and have any other major programs. So there was no engineering program at Georgia. And so I had to consider that, and I did consider tech. So growing up in Atlanta seemed like a reasonable idea, right? Especially if you're thinking about engineering. So when I got to campus, though, that's when I started being all in. And it wasn't a great time. We went 6-6 my first year, the 1989 season. The 1990 season, we went 4-7. Those were Ray Goff's first 2 years. I was ruing that Vince Dooley had to retire after going 9-3 in his last season and winning the Gator Bowl in January 1st. And then Ray Goff takes over, and we instantly become mediocre. And I was definitely looking forward to I bought into the sales pitch from my parents. I was looking forward to great football. I did not get great football when we first got here, but I still fell in love with it and I was still all in. So that's where my rabid fandom steps in. And I'm aware of and have become quite the student of Georgia football history and Georgia University history in general. All in my time there. It certainly fits my history love bug that I did ultimately get a history degree from the University of Georgia. But so I do love the history of it, and I have been following the history personally since then. So for me, the personal history of the Alabama series was I wasn't familiar with us playing Alabama very much, watching and seeing Georgia football in the 80s, and we only played them twice. And we'd only played them a few times in the 70s. So there just wasn't a big history there. So, in fact, we played the first game that I got to personally witness. So this was the story I was going to tell you, was the 1990 game. Alabama came to Athens. Gene Stallings was the coach. I don't remember if it was his first year. It might have been his first year. Could have been his second year. But this would be the 1990 season. They would win the 1992 national championship with Gene Stallings. So they were building towards being a great team. But they were not a great team to start the 1990 season. And so fairly early, let me see, when was that game? The 1990 game was September 22nd. So it was almost right on the day, like with this game. I mean, I guess it was a week earlier, right? This will be September 27th. So this was September 22nd of 1990. And Alabama came to town. And Gene Stallings had taken over. They were not a great team. They had already lost, I think, their first two games, and Georgia was the third game of the season for them. And as I just said before, this was Ray Goff's second season. The team's gonna go 4-7 this season. So this is not a great Georgia team either. So this is not a marquee matchup of the SEC's great teams. I mean, it is a matchup of two of the SEC's all-time great teams, but this isn't one of the great editions of it. And the game pretty much played out that way. And I don't remember why I did this, but for some reason or another, I moved from the student section, which was then where it is now, same place, sections like 105, 110 over there in the lower level. So, and you could sit in the 300 level as well, but I never wanted to sit in the 300 level. I wanted to be down where I could see the action. But for some reason or another, I left the student section, and I don't know why. And I know that by halftime at least, I don't think I started here, but I went to actually the Bama fan section. And so this, again, I've already told you the dates, so I guess I'm not dating myself. You know what the dates are. But at that time, I don't know how many of you have ever seen pictures or would remember this, but at that time, Georgia still had what essentially were like the erector set bleachers in the end zone right under the Sanford Bridge, or the Sanford Drive Bridge, and leading towards, like if you're exiting the stadium towards the Tate Center, those were sort of those metal bleacher stands. I mean, they looked temporary, but they had been there for years. I think they had been there since the 60s or something. I don't know how long they'd been there, but they were there when I got there. And, maybe a couple thousand people could sit in there. And they were metal riser bleachers. Felt much more like sitting in the stands of a high school stadium if you sat in those stands than even though we don't have seat backs and we just have bleachers around the rest of the stadium. Of course, they're attached to concrete. That's, because our stadium is made of concrete. So they felt a little rickety, and they were not brand new. And of course, they're in the end zone, so it's not the world's greatest view. And they were kind of short. I mean, the rest of the stadium is much higher. So at least if you were at the end and you get up higher, like if you go to the other side of the stadium and you're in the bowled-in end towards the graveyard, and with the railroad tracks behind you on the other side of the stadium, and you're even in the 100s, you could be pretty high up. You could be in row 50 or something like that, and you'd have a better view of the stadium. Of the field. You did not have a great view of the field. So I'm not sure why I thought to go here, but at this time, this is where we assign a lot of the away fans. Makes sense, right? So we have these crappy bleachers. I guess what I'm getting at is you kind of have a crappy bleacher seat in the end zone. And so this is where we let the away fans come. And at this time, Sanford Stadium's capacity, I think, was listed at about 86.5 was what we said the capacity of the stadium was, including those bleacher seats. So they would later, around the 1990s, somewhere in the 90s, they would bowl in that lower part. They would make permanent concreted stands that had more seating that covered that whole Sanford Drive-In side of the stadium. And then when Kirby got here, we would tear all that down and rebuild it yet again and make it bigger and add the locker room over on that side. So we were sitting in those stands, and I was there for the second half, and it was all Alabama fans. And the game, I'm pretty sure, either came down to, and I don't remember for sure, either came down to a made or a missed field goal. And I know the final score was 17-16 Georgia. We won. And I was sitting with the Bama fans, and the field goal was coming to those stands. So, and of course we don't have nets at Sanford Stadium, or I think we do now, but back then we didn't, or we don't on one side, but we do on the other. Anyway, to catch the ball when you kick the field goal at the extra point. So whatever it was, either Bama lined up for a field goal to try to win it because they were down 1 point, 16-17, or we had been down 16-14 and kicked a field goal basically at the final play or near the final play to win. And I didn't look it up, so I'm sorry. I don't remember which it was. But whichever way it was, one of the things I was really impressed by was the Bama fans were super knowledgeable and super friendly fans, okay? I had already been introduced to South Carolina fans, and I could tell you I did not like them at all. And I had already endured the season before, so we had other fans that came in 1989. I got to meet, and so at this point, I'm thinking that the Alabama fans are by far and away the nicest fans. And literally to a man or woman, everybody near me, because I was one of the only Georgia fans in the section, had crept over into this section. And again, I don't remember why. I wish I could tell you why I did it. But I was sitting over there with the Bama fans in these little away erector set seats under the end zone. And the game ended on this field goal play or just about around there. And that was the game. And we won. And that plummeted them to 0-3. And every fan that was nearby, I was obviously a Georgia fan. I was wearing Georgia gear and I had been cheering. Every fan who was in that area, and I'd been talking to them and just talking smack. And I mean, not smack. I wasn't being obnoxious. We were talking football. These are knowledgeable football fans, and we were talking football, talking about the game. Everybody who walked by as they were leaving, I just sat there kind of taking it all in and enjoying it. Everybody walked by, shook my hand, or patted me on the back, or offered some form of congratulations. You deserved it. Good job for your team today. Congratulations. Man, we suck. I can't believe we're 0-3. Don't know about what's going on with Stallings here. That was the mantra. And I was just impressed. I would never forget that. I mean, they were easily the classiest, most knowledgeable, and just the idea of like, as if we had been fighting it out mano a mano, those of us, and then they I won and now they're giving me that respect. That was the feeling. And it was interesting. I rarely experienced anything before, which I was pretty young in my fandom then, but even in all the years since then, I haven't really seen much like that. So it was definitely a definitive memory. So that's where the Bama series starts for me. It's been 17 games. That game going forward, there's been a total of 17 games in those 30-something years since then. So again, not a series we played a lot, but that was the first one. It started with a win. So, and it was almost, it was, I guess so that was 1990. This is 2025. So I guess it's 35 years ago. And almost to the day. I mean, I guess it'll be 35 years in a week. So maybe that's a good omen. Maybe we can win this game at least. And I don't care if we win it by a point. I mean, yes, I'd love to win it by, 35 points. That would be awesome. I would love to see us, win this game 42-3 or something like that. That would be an emphatic beatdown. That would be great for Georgia football. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I mean, I don't even think that 24-3 is terribly likely, but again, we'll get to that as we start breaking down the game. But I'd like to think that this little story that I brought up, maybe we'll all look back at this on Monday and say, hey, maybe that was an omen, that's interesting that guy was sharing his story about winning by on a field goal by 1 point 35 years ago, and 35 years ago in a week. So, okay, so that's my story about that. Next thing I wanted to get into is, let me just take a look real quick. Well, next thing I wanted to get into was, and we'll just do this, and this is where we'll end here, is talk about, and I mentioned this yesterday, talk about Kalen DeBoer. Okay. I don't know. I don't think we can go super deep on this topic because again, we don't have a lot of history. We can't look at Kalen DeBoer against all these other SEC coaches or a lot of other players. And frankly, that's, I think, one of the things that's really interesting. Most anybody you talk to in football circles, national football circles, national media says Alabama made a great hire when Saban decided to retire and they jumped out and they get Kalen DeBoer. And I've heard it said time and time again. I was listening this week again to the ESPN Game Day podcast, and I believe that's where I heard them talking about it. And some of the guys there were talking about, that was the guy to hire. I mean, that's the guy that Bama should have hired at that moment. He's the hottest coach out there. He's the coach, if you're going to pick any coach of who was available. And that's excluding that Kirby Smart was not available, and Dan Lanning had made it clear he's not available. So if you get past a couple of those guys who had coaching experience at Alabama, worked under Nick Saban, then you eliminate that and you start looking around and you say, who's the best hire? And, as far as the record or resume of what was out there, I can't argue that that's not true. But I will say that when we take a little closer look at Kalen DeBoer, I'm not saying I have questions, but going back to my wife being a Bama fan and her knowing that I like to break these things down, study them, and talk about them in detail. When Kalen DeBoer was first hired, I remember when it was first said he's going to be the coach. My wife asked me, she said, is this good? Do we like this? Are we happy about this for Bama? And I said, I don't know. I said, he certainly has an impressive record. I mean, when you look at it, he's won anywhere he is. His record is unbelievable. He had won, I knew at that time I could say, look, he'd been at a small school and he won like 3 national championships, and he only lost total games in single digits. And then he went to a couple D1 schools, FBS schools, and he won big, including, we certainly knew that he had just completed a 14-1 season and made it to the national championship game with Washington. And so, said, well, those credentials seem really rock solid, okay? But I had watched Washington. I try to watch as much college football in general. I love college football. I love sports. I love college football. So yes, I'm a rabid Georgia fan, but I will watch game day. I will watch other teams. I will watch the big matchups. And so I'd watched that Washington team play Oregon that year and a couple other games. And I'd seen them the year before in a couple games. Some of those the old quote unquote Pac-12 after dark. I'm one of those idiots who will stay up and watch those Pac-12 games at night, when family's gone to bed and they're no longer pressing for time. It's actually kind of relaxing to just be able to watch some football after 10 p.m. So I've seen them play. And my concern was, I told my wife when she first asked me that, I said, I don't know if he's the right culture fit. Bama fans love what Nick Saban represented. And anybody can love a guy who wins 6 national championships and never doesn't win 10 or 11 games, right? That's easy to love. But what I mean is, in the same way that Georgia fans, we will always, as Georgia fans, we will always have a heritage in great defense and running the ball. And so, yes, we could win chucking the ball all over the place and just trying to outscore and outgun people. But for instance, let's say that Josh Heupel, and we went all through his record, let's say that his system and his coaching was even more successful than it is. Let's say he had won 2 national championships at a decent sized school, and then we needed a coach and we went out to hire him, and you brought him in, and his system is to win games 45 to 30, just outgunning people. And that's kind of how his system is, right? It's offensive heavy at first, is what we've talked about. And we've broken all that down already, so we won't go back into that. And that's maybe a poor exaggeration, or we've already said that maybe that's not the most nuanced way to look at his offense and his coaching. And I think he is changing, but don't want to get buried in that. Just the point being is, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, look, if Georgia had a coach who was going undefeated or going 14-1 and 15-0 and 13-2 and getting into the playoffs and the championship, but we were doing it with minimal defense and just airing the ball out all the time and hardly ever running, there's always going to be a large portion of the Georgia fan base who would wish that we could do the same thing, but with a coach who emphasizes playing killer defense and running the ball. That's just the ethos of Georgia football. That's in our DNA. It's what we want to see. We just can't wait to cheer for a running back just rolling people over. We can't wait to cheer a linebacker just smashing somebody at the line and driving them back for no gain, or sacking the quarterback, strip sack and get the fumble. That's what we want to see, that more than we want to see 60-yard bomb passes. Everybody loves a 60-yard bomb pass. I'm not saying we won't take it, but as Georgia fans, that's really what we want to see. So Kalen DeBoer being hired at Alabama loves what Alabama fans love, and it's not they also, like us, have an ethos, a vibe, a feeling about their program that's beyond just any individual coach. It's throughout the history of the time, and they, like us, are very much in that same mode. They want to play. They have a history of defense. They don't have the running back history that Georgia has, with all the great running backs and Heisman Trophy winners, or they didn't before Saban. They had not won a Heisman Trophy before Saban, and they didn't necessarily. They had some running backs, but they didn't have that were well known. But they didn't necessarily have that stable of running NFL star after NFL star at running back like Georgia did. But defense definitely won the day, and there was a lot of great defensive players in the NFL that came out of Alabama. So they love not just what Saban did, winning all those games. They love the way Saban did it, the way the team played. That definitely fits Alabama. And so Kalen DeBoer, when I look at what he has done in his coaching career, he's been a guy who's kind of going to outfox you and going to out-scheme you. And a little bit like Heupel, going back to the Heupel thing, he's going to outgun you. He's not necessarily... Now, maybe he's just playing with what he has. Maybe he just plays with the athletes he has, and he'll take what he can get. I'm sure he would tell us, if he was sitting here doing an interview with us, he'd say, yeah, I'd love to have a defensive team that could, get 5 sacks a game and hold teams to under 200 yards a game, while my offense goes out and puts up 45 points a game, and we win, every game by 35 points and outgain everybody by 300 yards. What coach doesn't want that, right? But schematically, he doesn't have that on paper. There's nothing in his coaching record that shows that his idea is to play tough, physical, hard-nosed, ball control, run-oriented, just heavy defensive effort football. His football record seems to show somebody who's going to outgun you, kind of trick you. And again, I don't mean trick in a bad. I mean, I don't mean to say that it's not real. I just mean that, and I watched some of those games with Washington. Michael Penix, who of course now is playing for the Atlanta Falcons, and that's a little up and down, right? Everybody is praising him a week ago, and then he got benched in the game this last weekend, and they lost in a shutout. But Michael Penix at Washington had a couple NFL-worthy receivers, and their offense was primarily in the 14-1 2024 season or 2023 season. Their offense was primarily a series of 30-yard fade passes down the sideline. Just like, we're just going to out-athleticize it. This is what reminds me of what we talked about Tennessee. We're going to put the ball up in the air towards the sideline, and we're going to beat you man on man with our wide receivers, and our quarterback's going to put the ball where only our guy can get it, and we're just going to, just rip you for 30, 40, 50-yard chunk plays time after time and score quickly. And yeah, it's going to put the defense back out on the field, but we're just going to keep doing it. We're just going to score, and you're going to run out of gas trying to keep up. That really seems to be the mode in which Kalen DeBoer was coaching and winning at Washington, and at a lot of these, at some of the other stops. And he was, of course, known as an offensive coordinator. In between his years at Sioux Falls College, or I'll have to go look and see what the name of it, whether it was Sioux Falls College. Hold on, let's see. Wait a minute. He coached at this Sioux Falls team. So it was, Sioux Falls Cougar football. So that's University of Sioux Falls, which is an NAIA football. So that's so we have Division I, then you have Division II. This is like below Division II, maybe even below Division III. Okay. This is maybe the smallest level of football that could be considered college football. I'm going to get into that more in a second. But so he was there for 5 seasons, and then he left, and then he started being an offensive coordinator, and he was at a couple bigger schools, including Indiana, when Indiana first kind of got relevant in the last 10 years when Tom Allen was coaching there. He was the offensive coordinator, and he was the offensive coordinator for Michael Penix when he was at Indiana. So then when he went and ended up over at Washington, Michael Penix ends up in Washington after a bunch of moving around and some injuries and some redshirt years, and so he ultimately ends up there, and so they stay together as a pair down the road. So, but that's his MO. And so again, going back to what my wife asked me as a Bama fan, what do you think? And I said, I mean, he does look like a high quality coach. He probably is the best coach out there as far as record and accomplishments that you could pick up and hire. And Bama certainly deserves, their history says they should get the best, whoever the best is, right? But culture wise, and this is before he coached a game, this was just when it was announced he was hired. Culture wise, I don't know if it's a good fit, because I don't know if Bama fans are ready to see a guy who's not that concerned about defense and is just going to chuck it all over the place. And I'm not sure that's what he's going to do. Maybe he'll play differently, but that's what his history has been coming in. So what I can say is, look, he's adapted, and coaching is all about fit. Here's one of the things I want to say. It's all about, one of the funny things is we sit here and analyze, I talk about Josh Heupel's offense. Look, Josh Heupel knows what his offense is. I'm not revealing something that's like, oh, he didn't know. Man, this guy, on the Daily Dawg podcast pointed out how my wide receivers are spaced out wide. He knows what he's running. He knows that. And I don't know what his choices are, because to me it seems like that offense isn't capable. And I said that coming into the Georgia game, and I don't know that just the one game proved me wrong, but they put up the yards and they nearly won the game against us this year for the first time. But to me, I've never thought that offense was consistently capable of beating high-level defenses, the kind of defenses you run into among a handful of teams, or a handful of teams in the SEC can have any given year. Auburn, LSU, Georgia, Alabama. These are all teams that can have physical NFL star-laden defenses in any given year. And so I just thought Tennessee could be in that category. Historically, they used to have those kind of defenses. Think Reggie White, the minister of defense, right? So the Tennessee, so that's where I think I'm not sure if it makes sense to use that, as I call it, gimmick offense on that, because I don't know if it's versatile enough to win against the other high-level teams in the SEC. So same thing, with Washington, I think it made a lot of sense. The Pac-10, Pac-12 was always known as a wide open defense optional kind of league, right? So a guy who is crafty, who would do a trick play, a fourth down play, start a half with an onside kick, a little clever, and that's kind of Kalen DeBoer's mode of operation too. He's kind of clever. He's going to trick you. He's going to outthink you. He's going to out chess match you, and he's going to outgun you. That's really what he looked like in his career. And he's made a name for himself as an offensive guru, an offensive quarterback, wide receiver guy, not necessarily a running back guy, but so I think the point there is, I'm not sure if the culture ever really was the right fit, and I don't know if it's going to be the right fit for Alabama. He certainly can adapt. And so what I was trying to get at is, so when we look at coaches, whatever we talk about here, whatever I'm saying about the coach, look, all of these guys know more about football than I know about football. I think I'm pretty knowledgeable. I've been a lifelong fan. I've studied it. So I'm not just trying to blow sunshine at you here. I think I know some of what I'm talking about. And I point you to some other people. I recommend other people. I say, hey, these people know what they're talking about. And that's part of what I want to see here is I want to see knowledgeable commentary. It's great to have hot takes, and I love all the fans who have passion and energy, but there's a lot of people out there who are more about passion and energy than they are something really important to say about what we saw on the field and how we analyze it and what does it mean. And I'd like to, think that I'm pretty thoughtful about that. But look, probably everybody who's made it to be a head coach somewhere in college football knows more about football than I do, because they probably played their whole life and they've coached their whole life. So if they're my age or around my age, a little bit younger, a little bit older, and they've been involved in football every day of their life, and they've been paid to do this as a coach, as a player, they practiced as college players, whatever, they know more about football. You hear the phrase, like, they probably know more about football than I could forget. Or they forgot more. No, I'm sorry, I said that backwards. They probably forgotten more about football than I ever knew. So if all these guys know ball, they all know football, then why does one guy just completely crater? Why does a guy come in, get 3 seasons, wins 5 games total and gets fired. How does that happen? I mean, he obviously knew a ton about football, right? What happened? Well, it wasn't that he didn't know about football. It's all about fit. It's all about culture. It's all about, does he inspire the players? Does he do the things that are necessary to win at that school and in that league? So look, DeBoer has checked one big checkbox that none of us could have known, because he wasn't at Washington. He only coached 2 years at Fresno State in terms of an FBS school before going to 2 years at Washington before coming to Alabama. So I'm leaving the NIAI school out, the Sioux Falls University of Sioux Falls. I'm leaving that out for a moment, not because it doesn't count in coaching, but it certainly doesn't count in big-time national recruiting. I mean, that's not a part of that. I mean, obviously they recruit players on some level, but whatever it isn't the kind of recruiting that happens in Division I, FBS, big-time national top 25 football, college football. So one question for sure was, can he recruit, at the kind of level Alabama needs to recruit at to be a dominant team like Nick Saban did, or at least like a good high-level SEC top 10 team could be? And so far the answer is yeah. He's putting together an elite class. He did well in the short time he had. Now he's putting together an elite class. So right now he looks super competitive as a recruiter, despite the fact that he's never had to do it at this level before. So kudos to him. He's adapted. He's showing some, I'm not going to call it change because I don't know that he didn't do it or couldn't do it before, but we just saying he never had to. And now he is, and he's getting it done. So on that level, okay, check one. He can recruit at a level necessary to put Alabama where Alabama wants to be. So number 2, though, is he a good fit? Can he inspire the team? Does he have the right culture? Does he have the right mentality? Well, right now, Bama fans would be, if they were listening, they're screaming no, because they're mightily concerned. I mean, I'm sure they're fired up that they played well the last 2 games, and I think that they are licking their chops at the chance, because I think they feel like at this point, if you're a Bama fan, you probably feel like the Georgia game's in the bag. Doesn't matter how good Georgia is or how bad Alabama is, right? Alabama's going to beat Georgia. That's what the numbers say right now. So they're probably like, this is great. We get to play a top 5 Georgia team. We can earn back some respect, get back in the national title conversation. We can put that whole Florida State debacle behind us. And so I bet they're excited about this game. And we're probably all sitting here a little nervous, a little tight, a little pucker, right? Like, oh no, here comes Alabama. We can beat everybody in the country but Alabama. Like I mentioned in the podcast yesterday, we have lost, depending on how you look at it, last 5 years. We've 55-5 in the last 5 years, looking at the calendar. Last 5 seasons, complete seasons, 61-7. So in those 5 losses, 3 of them were to Alabama. So we only lost to 2 teams in the last 5 years that weren't Alabama. And if you go to the full season, 7 losses, 4 of those were to Alabama. So only 3 teams in 5 complete seasons that we've lost to that weren't Alabama. So Alabama is, Alabama is the team that regularly beats Georgia. And that's a problem. And we're talking about wanting to solve that. So, but Kalen DeBoer. So what is Kalen DeBoer? So he recruits well. Okay. And he's an offensive guru. And nobody at Alabama is going to be upset to have a great offense. But are they going to be okay with an offense that's really pass-oriented? Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what is good for recruiting, because, frankly, that's what the NFL does, right? The NFL has run away from running backs and primarily running game for a long time. So if you're an athlete wanting to be in the NFL, a guy who throws the ball and makes a star out of wide receivers and quarterbacks, maybe that's a guy you want to go play for, because that's what's going to get you in the NFL. Now, we're seeing a little bit of comeback. I mean, I'm seeing running backs start to get more preeminence. I mean, the Falcons, for better or worse, drafted a running back in the top 10 a couple of years ago. I see running backs that were recently drafted and playing well, getting higher draft stock again, as the league had run away from running backs. But so maybe that's changing. But so let's go back and let's break down Kalen DeBoer again, because I've already alluded to this. So he coached at the University of Sioux Falls. Okay. That is, like I said, NAIA, which is like the lowest level of still college football. In fact, this is so small. They play in the Great Plains Athletic Conference. So he coached there for 5 seasons, and he won 3 national championships in that NAIA thing. And he played for 4 and lost once. So he was in the game. 4 times, won 3 of them. He was 67-3, and this is head coaching, and it is college football, so that goes to his record. So when we look at his overall record, including his 2-1 record so far this season, he's 115-17. So that's like almost 10 seasons of football, and that pretty much mirrors Georgia's incredible record in the last 10 years of what we've done, as far as our win list. It's pretty close to what Alabama has done in those last 10 years. So it's an astounding record, and everybody said, wow, look at this guy. And what you always hear about his time at Sioux Falls was, look, when you win at that high a level and you win national championships, winning is winning. And so this goes back to what I was saying before. The man obviously knows how to draw up plays and how to coach and scheme football, and he knows football. But does winning at that NAIA level translate to anything like what it means to win at Division I, to win in the top 25, to win in the top 10? And I really don't know. Now, he is getting the recruiting done, and he inherited a fairly talented team too, right? I mean, even though there's a bunch of people went in the portal, like 30-something players went in the portal when Nick Saban retired, it's not like they were bereft of talent. He had a lot to work with, probably his most talented team ever when he stepped on campus without having to do anything. So he just inherited that team. But taking away the time at Sioux Falls, and looking at, he's an offensive coordinator. So he coaches at Sioux Falls until the 2009 season. And then he spends basically between the 2010 through the 2019 seasons being an offensive coordinator at a couple small schools, but then working his way up. So he was offensive coordinator at, I'm trying to see, he was at Southern Illinois. He was at Eastern Michigan. Then he was at Fresno State, where he would later head coach. He was under Jeff Tedford there. And then he went to Indiana under Tom Allen, and he was there for the 2019 season. And then he comes back. I don't remember why they got rid of, or what happened with the coach there at Fresno State, but he comes back having been an offensive coordinator, and Fresno State hires him. So his first season is the 2020 season in Division I football, FBS football at Fresno State. And he goes 3-3 in a shortened season. That's the COVID season, right? So stupid record, 3-3. So then his next year, he's 9-3. So they jump up to 9-3. All right. That's nice. They finished second in the Mountain West. And so then he gets hired by Washington. So he's out the door. He has a 12-6 record in 2 seasons, which didn't, that's a 6-game season the first one. He goes 3-3, then 9-3. Impressive at Fresno State, but, not knock your socks off, right? So then he goes to the Washington Huskies, and his first year at Washington, he obviously takes over a team that had some good things going for it. Now, I'm not saying he didn't coach well, but they go 11-2 his first year. They're second in the Pac-12, and they win the Alamo Bowl. So good season. Then he comes back in 2023. They go undefeated through the regular season. They get all the way to the national championship game, and they're not overly competitive. They get beat pretty convincingly by Michigan. So they beat Texas, though. They won a shootout against Texas. And again, that's what you would expect, right? 37-31. They won a shootout against Texas in the semifinals. And then they get to the championship game. Michigan goes 15-0. They both come in 14-0. Michigan wins the game. They win it pretty convincingly. And Washington was not that competitive. They were not. Michigan's defense, which is a lot more like a Georgia defense, was, right? They were very Georgia-style defense. Michigan's defense just shuts down their one-sided passing game. They had a running back who put up a lot of yards, but that was sort of a change-up, like a second or third pitch in baseball. They didn't really feature the run. They featured the deep pass, and Michigan was able to cover that, put pressure on them, keep them off the scoreboard, and pretty much run away with that game. But then he gets hired by Alabama, was Nick Saban suddenly retires. And so he finishes just a 2-season stint at Washington. He goes 25-3, and very impressively, he's in the national championship game in his second year. So then, he went 9-4 last year at Alabama, and so far he's 2-1. So his record as a Division I FBS level coach, Fresno State, Washington, and now Alabama, is 48-14. It's, again, everybody talks about the 115-17, the 3 national championships. And again, I'm giving him credit for that. But if you take that off, and I think it's worth taking off, because again, let me go back to this for a second. The Great Plains Athletic Conference and the NIAI championships, he's playing in a league where I added up every team in that league, the student population adds up to all of the teams in that league, add up to roughly roughly their entire student body of all of them combined is roughly 20,000 students or less, as I understand it, especially because they just kind of jam people in the student section in Sanford Stadium, okay? There's not assigned seating. As I understand it, we specifically allocate, I think, about 16,000 students to student tickets at Sanford Stadium for the students. But it's been thought that they can get up to 21,000 students jammed into that space. So the entire Great Plains Athletic Conference student body of all the schools combined might not completely fill our most packed out student section in Sanford Stadium. Okay. These are small schools. All right. So let me give you a sense of this real quick. Hold on one second. I had this queued up and now I've missed it. The Great Plains Conference. So these are the schools of the Great Plains. Tell me if you've heard of any of these. Okay. Briarcliff University, Concordia University, Dakota Wesleyan University, Doane University, which Daone, Dordt University, okay, Hastings College, Midland University, Morningside University. These sound like small private high schools more than that. Okay, Mount Marty University, I like that one a lot. Northwestern College, not Northwestern University, Northwestern College in Orange City, Iowa. College of St. Mary in Omaha, Nebraska. I didn't know there was another college in Omaha, Nebraska. And Waldorf University in Forest City, Iowa. These are mostly religious affiliated schools, Catholic, Lutheran, Evangelical, Lutheran, Methodist. The student bodies are the total enrollment in schools 940, 3,400, 886, 1948, 1929, 1,011, 1348. You get the idea. My point is, these are pretty small schools. My high school, the high school near here where I live, is about a 2,500 person high school. So there's only 2 schools in this entire Great Plains Athletic Conference that have as many people in it as the local high school here to where we are. Okay. And I made this point talking about Gunner when we were talking, who's Gunner Stockton? Gunner Stockton played in Tiger, Georgia, at Rabun County High School. Rabun County High School has like a little bit an enrollment about 700 students. So again, hard to know for sure. As awesome as his numbers were in high school, he clearly wasn't playing with the same level of competition in that small 1A division in the mountains as even the school around the corner here from me, which is a 6A school, and I think we go up to 7A here. So we have 2,500 students at this high school around the corner. So that's a bigger pool of people. So it's more competitive because you have more people to choose from and that's what these colleges, these are basically, the size, they're smaller than a lot of high schools. So, this is basically high school plus football is what I'm trying to get at. Now, again, X's and O's, guy clearly knows what he's talking about. He can scheme up and win 3 national championships and be in the game 4 times, get there in his second season. This is a guy who knows what he's doing. Again, he knows ball. He knows football. But I don't think that 67-3 record in those 3 national championships, I don't think it's fair, actually, to put that in like people did when he got hired at Alabama and talk about him as a coach with a 100. And when he came in Alabama, it was like he's 103 and, it was like 103-9 in his coaching career with 3 national championships at a smaller level school. I think that's overselling it, and it's underselling how non-related that 67-3 record at Sioux Falls University is to coaching in big-time football. In big-time football at Fresno State, Washington, and Alabama, he's 48-14, which is not bad, but that's a 774 winning percentage, okay? And he hasn't won. He won the Pac-12 once. He came in first the 1 year, and he made it to the national championship game, and he did that in his second year at Washington. And so we don't know what would have happened if he stayed, and now he's at Alabama. And all we can see is that at Alabama, he's taken what is probably the most talented roster he's ever had, and he's gone backwards compared to what he had at Washington. So at the moment, it doesn't look like the culture change between Nick Saban and Kalen DeBoer at the moment is rocky. Now, if they stick with it long enough and they don't get really frustrated, and hopefully we give them a lot of ammunition this week to be even more frustrated. Okay. If they're 2-2 and bounced out of the top 25 at the end of this coming weekend, Bama fans, there's going to be a lot of noise in Alabama. And I don't think they're going to fire him mid-season, but I mean, the seat's going to start getting hot. And if they stick with him long enough, maybe his culture will win out. But at the moment, I guess what I'm saying is the fit may not be there. Everybody who gets hired to be a coach knows what they're doing. They know football. Do their ideas work? Do they connect with the campus? Do they connect with the players? Do they know how to take this group of players? One thing that's clearly different, and one thing he probably has never had to do, he's always been coaching, I guess, what you'd call underdogs. I mean, maybe they didn't feel that way as multi-time national championships at Sioux Falls University. But on a certain level, when you're basically playing for a school of 2,000 people, you can't think of yourselves as one of the, even as a national champion, that you certainly know where your pecking order is in the world of college football. Okay, you know you're not going out there and even playing competitively with a regular, I mean, you know, that school wouldn't have been even competitive with his next school, Fresno State. I mean, and Fresno State is not a school any of us fear, you know, playing in it. So again, as an FBS coach, he has a nice record. And he made it to that national championship game. And he did it with a team in Washington, but he did it with very one-sided game. Defense optional. That season, they averaged about 460 yards on offense, and they gave up about 400 yards on offense. They got outrushed on the season by most of their opponents, and they put up points, but they gave up points. You go through and you look at their schedule, and you got a lot of games where they were gunning it out with people. Okay. So, and I don't know that, like I said, I can't say that that's what he wanted to do. I'm not saying he wouldn't be just as happy or more happy to play killer defense along with high-powered offense. I'm sure he would. But sometimes it's not just wishing. Sometimes having that happen or having that be an option is something that you have to create, not just hope. Meaning, you know, you have to emphasize coaching and recruiting and putting together a championship level defense and playing with a certain kind of intensity that is a little bit different. And so I think that, you know, one of the things that's definitely concerning, and I'm sure Bama fans are concerned about this, after losing at Florida State, he's 2-5 on the road. And you're going to hear about that a lot because we got a 33-game win streak at home, and they're 2-5 on the road, and they lost their most recent road game. And so here they come for their next road game. So, but again, there's something just a little bit off and a little bit different about his connecting with the talent he has at Alabama, that they are not able to. I mean, one thing, Nick Saban won everywhere, on the road, anywhere, neutral site, you name it. But they just weren't able to. I mean, Nick Saban didn't have a demonstratively worse record on the road than he did at home. I mean, he won wherever he had to win. So, you know, I think that's all I can say really is it's too early to tell whether DeBoer is really a great FBS Division I top 10 level coach. He obviously knows football, and he obviously has won at a big level at some small schools. And he's taken schools like Fresno State and made them immediately good, and he made Washington immediately good. But he did it, and I'm not saying smoke and mirrors, but he did it by just outgunning and sort of outsmarting people, making the right play, a fourth down call here or there, you know, you name it. He's just kind of taken the chances necessary. And he's kind of out, you know, and he's had a lot of games like the Texas game in the playoffs in 2023 where they won 37-31. And even if they continue to win, I think that's going to be a frustration for Alabama fans. I don't think Alabama fans are prepared to watch their team go out and play coin flip shootout games, even if they come out on top more often than not, like DeBoer did at Washington in 2023. So, you know, I don't know if that gives us the kind of breakdown and the kind of insight like we were able to really take apart Josh Heupel's offense and look at the matchups with Kirby Smart and all that. We know what happened in the game last year, And I mean, I will say they obviously had some great scripted plays at the beginning of that game. They caught our defense unaware, and our defense, I think, had to help them a little bit. I don't think just great plays could have put up the 28-0 lead. But again, same thing as like Tennessee, like we talked about Tennessee. When you score that fast, you score that quickly. They were up 28-0 like a couple minutes into the second quarter, which meant that we still had almost three full quarters of the game to mount a comeback, and we did. And that's one of the problems of being a little bit one-dimensional. Having a gun it, score quick offense means that you're putting your defense, even if they are really talented, out on the field for a ton of plays. You leave a ton of time left. Even though you're up 28-0, you've got almost all of the second quarter, all of the third quarter, and all the fourth quarter to play. And that worked to Georgia's advantage last year. Did we still lose the game? Yes, we did. Could we have, should we have won the game? You wouldn't have thought ever possible when we're down 28-0. But in the end, I think most of us feel like we should have won that game. We had a lead with with 2 minutes to go, right? Should have won it. So all you had to do is not give up, the long touchdown, which is what we did. So our defense let us down there. And we're going to talk about our defense and break down the game more, in this matchup between Alabama. I'll just allude to a couple things I've seen. I think that the Florida State game, maybe more than even last year's matchup between Kirby and DeBoer in last year's game. Last year's game kind of just looks like a freak show accident, really. I mean, I don't know you just don't see a lot of games like that. I mean, almost ever, right? Team gets down 28-0, comes all the way back to take a lead, then loses. That's just a freaky game. So I think the Florida State game, we're going to break it apart starting tomorrow. I think that's a game that might be a lot more instructive. We don't have a lot of data to work here with, in terms of DeBoer. He hasn't been at Alabama that long. All we can say is, look, they didn't win 10 games last year, and they lost 4. And you haven't seen either at Alabama in a while, okay? Alabama hadn't lost more than two or three games in forever, and it seems like, and they hadn't failed to win 10 games in forever. So he's definitely taken the standard down, and it wasn't because they lacked the talent. There's no two ways around it. However good he turns out to be as a coach, or however good he is as a coach, he took a team that should have gone no worse than 10-2, and he made it 9-4 last year. So that's a knock on him. And so far this season, they're 2-1. They've rebounded. They look a little better. They look a little sharper. But that first game is hard to get the impression out of there, because what we all saw, if you watched any of it or paid any attention to it or read about it or whatever afterwards, is that they just got physically beat on both lines, offensive and defensive. They just got beat. So, but Ty Simpson has been playing well. He's been chucking it all over the place. His stats look great. We're going to break all this down and say what it means. But it's a little bit scary looking ahead as a Georgia fan, because right now the Alabama offense, regardless of how good a team they are, whether we win or lose, the Alabama offense right now looks a lot like Tennessee offense. And even though we won the game with Tennessee, as a Georgia fan, you go back to ethos and culture. I don't know that we're prepared to get used to watching a bunch of 44-41 style games, right? That comes down to who has the ball last. Although I think that we are getting used to that. We talked about that already in the last week or so in our podcast, that, hey, we're playing more of these close, heart-wrenching overtime games than we would like to see. And, look, games are going to be tighter when you play other elite teams or other teams that can match you in terms of talent or coaching or capability. The games are going to be tighter. I don't know if they should all go to overtime, but so we'll break that down. But that's where we are for today. We're thinking about that, about DeBoer and what it means and what his style of play means and what's the culture fit. What we come away from that is saying, look, he's taken Bama down a notch, not up. Now, this is his second year. I've mentioned this before. The second year phenomena in coaching is a real thing. You just look up and down a lot of teams who were either in position to win national championships or explode in a decent conference. A lot of teams seem to benefit from the second year is when it really kicks in. Like teams go, it happened for us, right? Kirby Smart was 8-5 in his first year. His second year, he's in the national championship game. So second year phenomena is a no-doubter. And now, again, DeBoer looks like he's already sort of made that look a little tough with the way that Florida State game goes. I mean, even if they manage to slip past us and beat us in this game, it's hard to get past the idea that they got dominated at Florida State. So they're going to have to do more than even just beat us to really make anybody think that, well, this is a team that's going to say something about who wins the national title. Or no, I mean, they'll say something because if they give us a loss, that's saying something about the playoffs and the national title. But I mean, who's actually going to compete for it? Nobody. Even just beating us wouldn't put people to say, oh, well, Bama's ready to compete for the national title again. It would only put them back moving in that conversation. That's how bad the Florida State perception was. And the perception that comes from last year, the perception that says this team is oddly taken a step back, not a step forward. He's recruiting well. He's obviously been a winner wherever he's been before. But when you really look at his record at FBS schools, it's really good, not outstanding. He is in the second year at Alabama, but you would have expected not to see that Florida State game if he was going to have that second year explosion phenomena that's a march to a national championship. So that's where we are on DeBoer. So we'll start unpacking the game and what we expect from the game. We're going to look at that Florida State game and talk about it a little bit more and what it means to us starting tomorrow. And we'll start talking about the matchups. We'll look at Ty Simpson and what's been going on with him and how he compares to Aguilar and our defense, how it's going to match up. All these things are coming down the road. We got a lot to do. This is an exciting week. It's a big game. And as Dawg fans, like I talked about yesterday, this one means a lot. Even though the history from last year says we could lose this game, and we lost this game last year at the same time, and we still won the SEC championship. We still made the playoff, and that could happen again this year. So I don't think this game means everything in terms of our hopes and our desires and our ultimate destination this season. But I think as a Georgia fan right now, there's no bigger ceiling that we have to bust through. There's nothing else we have to prove more than turn around this situation with Alabama. And rarely has it looked like a better opportunity than a team that seems to be underperforming compared to its talent, a team that is coming to our place for the first time since 2015. All these other games have been neutral site or like at their place last year. So it's been a long time since we've had Alabama between the hedges. Now, admittedly, the last time that happened did not go well. 2015, that was the Nick Chubb, Sony Michel team. That was a team that came in ranked 8th and Alabama was 13th. So it was a similar setup where we were the higher ranked team. We were favored. I think game day was there. It turned into a rainy, ugly game in the second half. And Bama was up 24-3 at the half. They were up 38-3 late in the game. And Nick Chubb ripped off an 83-yard touchdown in the rain in the third quarter to make it at least double-digit score and to really make the Bama defense mad that they gave up 100 yards to Nick Chubb, mostly all on one play. But that's how greedy they were. They were not just they wanted to keep Nick Chubb under 100 yards. I mean, they were focused on that kind of a thing. So last time Bama was there wasn't really great for us. But it feels like if we're going to do it, this is a great time to take control of the current situation with Alabama. We got them between the hedges. We're the favored team. We're the team that's got a little more purpose and direction with where we're going. We don't seem as wandering as they do. And, we're 33 straight at home. They're 2-5 in the last year and a half on the road. So all food to think about. I'll let you chew on that until we come back together tomorrow. And until then, you know what we say, go Dogs.